"Imani Carter, please don't leave before I finish speaking." The words cut across the ballroom of the Ashford Grand, and for a moment even the jazz trio in the corner forgot the next bar of the song they were playing. 200 guests turned toward the tall glass doors at the back of the room, where Malcolm Reed stood with his hand already resting on the door handle. His daughter, 7-year-old Zara, stood beside him in a yellow dress, clutching a small wooden bird that had belonged to her mother. Near the stage, Preston Wade remained frozen on one knee, a ring box open in his palm, the diamond catching the light from the chandeliers above. Cameras that had been aimed at him for the proposal now swung toward the back of the room instead. Preston rose slowly, his jaw tight beneath a practiced smile. "Imani," he said, low enough that only the people closest to him could hear, "whatever this is, it can wait." "You made sure it couldn't," Imani said. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at Malcolm. Malcolm didn't move toward her. He didn't smile like a man who had already won something. His voice, when it came, was even and careful. "Are you asking me to stay?" he said. "Or are you asking yourself if you can stand alone without an audience?" The question landed harder than any accusation could have. 7 weeks earlier, Malcolm Reed had been nothing more than Imani's director of operations, a widower who fixed problems without being asked to and left the office at 5:30 sharp to pick his daughter up from aftercare. He never once acted impressed by Imani's wealth, and he never once acted like her approval was something he needed. That, more than his resume, was the reason she had chosen him for a task neither of them had planned on. It started at a quarterly dinner with the board of Carter Media Group, the company Imani's late father had built from a single radio station into a national platform. The company was 2 weeks from finalizing a 9-figure partnership with a European broadcasting group, and several board members had made it clear, in careful corporate language, that a settled personal life would help steady investor confidence heading into the vote. Near the end of dinner, one of the older board members, a silver-haired man named Foster Doyle, raised his glass with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Imani can close a billion-dollar deal before lunch," he said, chuckling into his scotch, "but I still don't think she knows the first thing about actually settling down." A ripple of polite laughter went around the table. From his seat near the wall, where operations staff were seated to be useful rather than seen, Malcolm watched Imani's knuckles go white around the stem of her wine glass. A few minutes later his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He excused himself into the hallway and answered in a low voice. It was Zora's after-school counselor. There had been an incident, nothing dangerous, just cruelty of the kind 7-year-olds are capable of without meaning to be monsters. A classmate had told Zora that she'd never get picked for the reading circle unless she talked less country and got new shoes like the other girls. When Malcolm finally got Zora on the phone herself, her voice was small. "Maybe I should just talk different at school," she said. "Maybe if I had shoes like Aaliyah's, they'd pick me." Malcolm closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against the cool hallway wall. "No, baby, you don't have to shrink yourself or dress yourself into somebody else's idea of you. The right people won't need you to audition for a seat at their table. What if nobody picks me? Then you wait on the ones who can actually see you. Anybody who only wants the version of you that's easy to swallow was never really choosing you at all." Neither Malcolm nor Zora knew that Imani had stepped into that same hallway moments before, escaping the dinner table for air, and had heard almost the whole exchange. When the call ended, and Malcolm turned around, he found her standing a few feet away out of the light. Looking less like the woman whose name was etched into the lobby of her own company, and more like someone who had spent years being admired without ever once being known. "Everything all right with the event?" he asked. "The event's fine," Imani said. "It's my life that's the problem." He didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurance the way most people around her did. She appreciated that more than she expected to. "The board wants me settled before the European vote," she finally said. "They think the right relationship will calm the room." "That's not romance," Malcolm said. "That's a press release." "Exactly." She almost smiled. "You see things other people talk themselves out of seeing. Help me. Help me find a man who sees me before he sees Carter Media." Malcolm stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "You want your operations director vetting your love life?" I want the only person in this building who's ever told me an inconvenient truth to help me recognize the difference between a good performance and an honest man. That's not in my job description. I'm not ordering you, Imani said. I'm asking. Malcolm thought about Zora, about the tuition payments at her new school, about the quiet dignity of a woman standing alone in a hallway admitting she didn't know how to be chosen for the right reasons. 6 weeks, he said finally, and I set the terms. She held out her hand, agreed. The next morning Malcolm walked into Imani's office carrying a legal pad instead of a folder of candidates. She glanced at it, then at him. Where are the names? First I need to know what you're actually looking for. Someone respectable. Educated, no public scandal history. That's a job posting, Malcolm said, not a person. It's a starting point. It's a hiding place, he said quietly. She sat back, surprised not many employees spoke to her that way, and even fewer survived doing it twice. Do you want to be admired, Malcolm went on, or do you want to be known? Someone who looks right on your arm, or someone who can sit across from you in silence and not make you feel like you have to fill it? Imani looked out through the glass wall at the skyline. I don't know, then that's where we start. He set 3 rules. Imani would make the final decision herself. No one would be humiliated in the process, and she would pay close attention to how each man treated the people who could offer him nothing in return. The first candidate, a hotel developer named Roland Ash, spent 25 minutes describing his property portfolio, and less than 2 asking Imani a single question about herself. When a young server brought the wrong entree, Roland snapped at him with a coldness that made the whole table go quiet. Imani left before dessert. The second, a political strategist named Curtis Wren, remembered her coffee order and complimented her foundation's literacy program with what sounded like genuine warmth. But when their driver missed a turn on the way home, Curtis leaned forward and said, with icy patience, "Is following directions really this difficult a job?" Imani watched the driver apologize and watched Curtis settle back into his seat as if nothing worth noting had happened at all. At 11 that night she called Malcolm. "You were right," she said. "About what? Charm isn't the same thing as kindness." Malcolm was washing dishes while Zora finished a worksheet at the kitchen table. Imani could hear water running and a pencil tapping against paper in the background. "Charm wants an audience," he said. "Kindness usually hopes nobody's looking." She laughed softly more than she meant to. "Do you always talk like that?" "Only when I'm tired." The third candidate, a well-regarded cardiologist named Dr. Reggie Sims, listened attentively and spoke with real feeling about a clinic he wanted to open in an underserved neighborhood. Then, over dessert, he slid a proposal across the table and asked for a seat on the board of Imani's family foundation. "A serious relationship should open doors for both people," he said, smiling. Imani looked down at the folder and understood that even his compassion had arrived with a price tag attached. She called Malcolm again on the drive home. The call lasted almost an hour, drifting from Reggie to the foundation, to the strange loneliness of eating dinner most nights in a house built for a family of 6 and occupied by 1. The calls became a habit after that. Imani found herself waiting for his voice each evening. And Malcolm found himself remembering the small things she mentioned in passing. The peach cobbler her grandmother used to make the corner store, where she'd written her first business plan on the backs of receipts. The way she couldn't stand the smell of gardenias because they reminded her of her father's funeral. One Tuesday, a sudden ice storm shut half the city down, and Imani's car slid out on a side street 2 blocks from Malcolm's neighborhood. Roadside assistance quoted a 3-hour wait, so she called him instead. He showed up in an old work truck, checked under the hood, and told her the alternator had gone. "You can wait on the tow," he said, "or you can come eat with us." Zora made enough spaghetti for a small army. "I don't want to impose. You'd be rescuing us from leftovers for the rest of the week." The Reed house was small and warm and unapologetically lived in. A backpack sat by the stairs. Kids' drawings covered the fridge. The whole place smelled like garlic bread and tomato sauce. Zora appeared in mismatched socks and studied Imani with open curiosity. "Your dad's boss." "I am." "Do you make him stay late a lot?" "Not usually." Zora looked over at her father. "That means sometimes." Malcolm set 3 plates on the table. Your negotiating skills need some work, baby girl. The pasta was slightly overcooked, the garlic bread a little burnt at the edges, but Imani ate without once checking her phone while Zora filled the room with stories about her class hamster. Then her eyes landed on a folded scarf resting over the back of the empty fourth chair. Malcolm followed her gaze. "That was Denise's seat," he said quietly. Zora set down her fork. "My mom passed when I was 3. Imani looked at Malcolm. There was no plea for sympathy in his expression, only memory, carried carefully, the way people carry things they refuse to put down. After dinner, Zora dragged Imani over to show off a lopsided diorama she and Malcolm had built for a school project. "It's perfect," Imani said. Zora studied her seriously. "Dad says perfect usually isn't honest." Malcolm covered his face with one hand. "I may have given her too many opinions." Zora grinned, then turned thoughtful again. "Do people love you?" she asked. "Or do they just love being seen next to you?" The kitchen went quiet. Imani had negotiated with hostile shareholders and skeptical investors without flinching, but a 7-year-old's question left her without a rehearsed answer. "I don't know," she admitted. Zora nodded like that honesty was enough on its own. When the tow truck finally arrived, Imani lingered at the door. Behind her was warm light and easy laughter. Ahead of her waited a 6-bedroom house built for a family that had never come. Malcolm handed her an umbrella, their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away right away. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "And thank you, Zora." "She did most of the cooking," Malcolm said. Watching Zora wave from the doorway, Imani realized Malcolm hadn't just been showing her the right kind of man. He'd been showing her the kind of life she actually wanted. By Monday, she'd called the whole search off in her own head. Then Preston Wade came back into the picture. Preston arrived with a polished investment proposal and the easy confidence of a man who'd never once doubted he belonged in any room he walked into. He listened well, remembered details, donated generously and quietly, and had enough money of his own that no one could accuse him of chasing Imani's fortune. Foster, Doyle, and half the board watched him with open approval. Here, finally, was the steady partner they'd been hinting at for months. Malcolm dug for something wrong and came up empty. Preston's companies paid their people on time. Former colleagues described him as tough but fair. His charity work checked out. "You found the right one," Imani said after her second dinner with Preston. Malcolm kept his eyes on the file in front of him. "I found no evidence that he's the wrong one. That's not the same thing." "It's the most honest answer I have," he said. He started pulling back after that, fewer late calls. Meetings routed through her assistant instead of direct texts. Preston looked, on paper and in person, like exactly what the board wanted, and Malcolm told himself that dignity meant stepping aside for a possibility he couldn't disprove. Preston folded easily into foundation dinners and investor circles, then proposed financing a piece of Carter Media's international expansion. On paper, the deal helped both companies. Still, something nagged at Malcolm. The way Preston's questions about a pending acquisition target got a little too specific. The way his warmth cooled the instant Imani left a room. Nothing he could point to, just enough to keep his guard up. 2 weeks before the European vote, Carter Media hosted a scholarship gala for first-generation college students. Zora came in a yellow dress, the little wooden bird from her mother tucked into a small beaded purse. Imani knelt down to admire it. "My mom carved it before she got sick," Zora said. "She gave it to me right before Dad took over reading me bedtime stories." The bird was fragile, its wing chipped at one edge, but Zora refused to leave it in the car. Preston watched from across the room as Imani laughed with Malcolm and Zora, instead of standing beside him for photos. He'd expected her at his side, not crouched on the floor listening to a child explain the difference between a cardinal and a robin. When Imani was called up to speak, Preston crossed to where Malcolm stood near the dessert table. "You seem awfully comfortable here," Preston said. "We're here for the students." Of course, Imani's always had a soft spot for people who make themselves useful. Malcolm held his gaze. "Useful isn't an insult where I'm from." As Zora hurried past chasing a friend, the clasp on her purse came open and the wooden bird tumbled out onto the marble floor. Preston stepped back reflexively and his heel came down on one delicate wing, snapping it clean. Zora froze. Preston lifted his foot, glanced at the small crack in the marble beneath the bird, then at the bird itself. That's unfortunate. My mom made that, Zora said, her voice trembling. These things can be repaired, Preston said smoothly. No need to make a scene over it. He wasn't loud. He wasn't cruel in any way a camera would catch. That was exactly what made it worse. He'd looked straight at a child's grief and filed it under inconvenience. Malcolm knelt and gathered the pieces into his palm. You didn't do anything wrong, he told his daughter. Can we fix it? I think so. Preston exhaled like a man relieved a minor problem had resolved itself. Then it's handled. Imani had come back to find Zora and caught the last of it from behind the stage curtain. An accident is what happened to the bird, she said, stepping forward. What happened after was a choice. Preston's expression flickered. Imani, I didn't realize you were standing there. That's the problem. He insisted he'd only been trying to keep a small mishap from turning into a spectacle. Malcolm rose with the broken pieces in one hand and Zora's hand in the other. We should go, he said. Imani stepped toward him. Malcolm, please stay. He looked at her not with blame, but something closer to sadness. She's seen enough for one night. He left with Zora, and Imani stayed behind next to a man more worried about optics than the child he'd just hurt. Later, in a quiet hallway off the ballroom, Preston told her he regretted his tone. I could have been more patient, he admitted. But you can't judge someone's whole character off one awkward moment. No, Imani said. But an awkward moment usually shows you what the comfortable ones were hiding. This is about Malcolm. This is about Zora. Is it? Preston's voice stayed level. You've let an employee get tangled up in your personal life. Now his daughter's part of it too. People are starting to wonder whether he's actually vetting your suitors or just eliminating his competition. Anger rose in her, but the comment snagged on a fear she'd been avoiding. Malcolm was, technically, still her employee. She controlled his paycheck, his position, his future at the company. Even if his intentions were exactly what they appeared to be, the optics could hurt them both. I need some space, she said. Preston nodded slowly. Take it, I won't push. He didn't propose that night. He didn't say it was over either. He simply stepped back and let her uncertainty do the work for him. The next morning, after fixing the wing on Zora's bird with wood glue and a steady hand, Malcolm met Imani in her office. I told Preston I needed space, she said. Zora will be glad to hear it. And you, this isn't about me, that's what you always say, because I work for you. She came around the desk. Is that the only reason? For a long moment Malcolm said nothing. Then he set the folder he was holding down on the table. No, he said. The truth is I care about you. I care that you eat dinner alone in a house with 6 empty chairs. I care that people praise your title and never ask if you're tired. I care that you laughed in my kitchen like you'd forgotten you were even allowed to. But I won't let gratitude turn into something you feel obligated to repay, and I won't let loneliness make this decision for you, and I sure won't start something while my paycheck runs through your signature. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and set it on her desk. What is this? My resignation, it's final. You can't leave because I asked you to be honest. I'm leaving because honesty needs clean ground to stand on. She stepped closer. I don't want you to go. Wanting somebody close isn't the same as choosing them freely, he said. How will either of us know the difference while I still need your approval to keep a roof over my daughter's head? Before he could leave, Foster Doyle walked in without knocking, Preston a step behind him carrying a folder. Foster glanced at the resignation letter and allowed himself a thin, humorless smile. So the rumors are true. What rumors? Imani asked. That Reed's been using company time and access to position himself as your preferred choice. Malcolm's face stayed calm. Every meeting was requested by Imani. Every expense was approved through proper channels. Preston set his folder on the desk. I didn't want to believe it either. But several employees have reported private calls, off-site meetings, unusual access to your calendar. The facts weren't wrong. They were just arranged dishonestly. Imani had initiated nearly every call, and the dinner at Malcolm's house had only happened because her own car had failed on an icy street. Stripped of context, though, the pattern looked exactly like what Preston wanted it to look like. The board's meeting this afternoon, Foster said. Until then, I'd suggest Reed be placed on administrative leave. No, Imani said. The word came fast but not with the force it needed. Preston pressed her to explain in front of the board that her operations director had spent weeks screening her suitors while quietly falling for her himself, and to explain why she'd kept him close after those feelings became obvious. Imani thought about the pending vote, the thousands of employees whose jobs depended on the board's confidence in her judgment, and fear crowded out the courage that should have answered him instead. "We'll address it properly once I've spoken with legal," she said. Foster nodded like she'd confirmed exactly what he suspected. Malcolm's eyes dropped for one brief second. "Malcolm," Imani said, "I'm not abandoning you, I just need time to handle this the right way." "You had the truth," he said quietly. "You chose time instead." He set his employee badge down next to the resignation letter. Preston started to speak, but Malcolm turned to him first. "I'm leaving so no one can ever say she chose me while I still depended on her for a paycheck. Don't mistake that for guilt." Then he walked out. That evening, Zora watched her father drop his badge into a kitchen drawer. "Did you lose your job?" "I gave it back, because of Ms. Imani." "Why would you do that?" "Because respect matters more when love gets complicated." Zora touched the mended wing of her wooden bird. "Did she say you did something wrong?" "She didn't say I did anything bad." "That's not the same thing." "No," Malcolm said, "it isn't." At the office, Imani sat alone that night reading through the internal report Foster's team had prepared. Every innocent moment with Malcolm had been rearranged to look like calculation. Near midnight, the company's general counsel, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Renata Cole, walked in carrying a different file entirely. "I went through Preston's proposed financing agreement," Renata said. "Nothing illegal in the main contract, but one of the attached acquisition schedules bothers me." The schedule showed that a firm connected to Preston's investment group had opened quiet negotiations to buy the same regional streaming platform Carter Media had been planning to acquire. If Preston's firm closed the deal first, he could turn around and sell access back to Imani's company at a steep markup. "How would he even know our target?" Imani asked. "Only a small circle had that information." Imani thought back to a private dinner where she'd mentioned the acquisition in passing. Certain Preston had simply been interested in her work. He'd been collecting intelligence instead. Renata slid another page across. "There's also a proposed board observer seat for his firm, tucked into the expansion agreement. It doesn't hand him control outright, but paired with the acquisition play, it gives him real leverage over you. Can we prove intent?" "Not yet." Imani looked down at Malcolm's resignation letter, still sitting where he'd left it. "He warned me. He studied what I owned before he ever asked what I actually needed." "Then maybe," Renata said, "you should have listened sooner." It stung because it was true. Over the following days, Imani's legal team traced emails, meeting notes, and quiet document revisions. It wasn't some elaborate corporate heist. It was simpler than that and more believable for it. Preston had used Imani's trust to identify a valuable acquisition, positioned an affiliated firm to buy it out from under her, and planned to use the partnership itself as leverage to push Carter Media into accepting unfavorable terms. His interest in her hadn't been entirely fake. It just had never once outweighed his interest in advantage. Foster, it turned out, had helped draft the internal report against Malcolm after Preston promised him a leadership seat on the newly expanded board. Imani called Malcolm twice. Both calls went to voicemail. On the third evening, she drove to his house herself. Zora answered the door in a purple sweatshirt. "Is your dad home?" "He's helping Ms. Odell carry her groceries in." Zora glanced down at the fixed wing on her wooden bird. "You know he fixes stuff, right?" "He fixes everything he can." "I'm sorry, Zora." The girl studied her with a seriousness well beyond 7 years. "Did you tell everybody my dad didn't do anything wrong?" "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I wanted proof before I went up against the board." "My dad told you the truth already," Zora said. "You just wanted something safer." Imani had nothing to say to that. Down the sidewalk, Malcolm appeared carrying 2 grocery bags, and he stopped short at the sight of her car. "I know what Preston's doing," Imani said as he set the bags down on the porch. "Then stop him." "I will." "Good." She waited for something more. He gave her nothing else. "I should have defended you that day," she said. I knew the report was misleading, and I still asked for time because I was afraid of what the truth would cost the company. And what did the silence end up costing you instead? You, she said. His expression softened just slightly, but not enough to erase the distance between them. An apology doesn't undo what happened, he said. I know. Stopping Preston doesn't make what happened to you just another line item in a successful quarter. I know that too. Her voice shook, but she didn't hide it. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking for the chance to tell the truth in the place where I failed to tell it before. Malcolm glanced toward the house, where Zora watched from behind the curtain. Then do it because it's right, he said. Not because you want me to come back. I will. Preston had originally planned to announce the international partnership at a formal gala, then propose to Imani if she said yes to the deal in front of the room. Even after she'd asked for space, he'd kept the ring, betting that public pressure would push her back toward him. Imani learned the details of his plan only hours before the event was set to begin. Renata urged her to cancel it. No, Imani said. He used public trust to hide private manipulation. The board and every employee affected by that deal deserved to hear the truth in the same room where the lie was supposed to be told. She sent Malcolm one message. I'm correcting the record tonight. You don't owe me your presence. He didn't answer right away. Zora read it over his shoulder anyway. Are we going? No, why not? Because she should do the right thing without needing an audience from us. Zora considered that, maybe. But leaving without letting somebody say thank you can make the truth look unfinished too. Malcolm looked at his daughter and, not for the first time, saw a stubbornness in her that hadn't come from him alone. They arrived just before 9 and stayed near the back doors, planning to leave after greeting a few former coworkers. At the front, Preston stood beside Imani as if the last 2 weeks had never happened. Foster introduced the partnership, praising its stability to a room full of polite applause. Preston stepped to the microphone. Tonight is the start of a new chapter, he said, for both our companies, and maybe for Imani and me. She didn't smile. He opened the velvet box and dropped to one knee, cameras lifting all at once, turning the moment into exactly the kind of trap he designed it to be. Imani, he said, we have a chance to build something extraordinary together. Will you marry me? She looked at the ring. Then she reached out and took the microphone from his hand. Before I answer that, she said, everyone in this room deserves to know what that future was actually built on. Preston rose slowly as Imani laid it all out, the affiliated acquisition, the intended profit, Foster's manufactured report. Renata circulated printed copies of the evidence to board members seated near the front. Foster stood. This is a distorted read of the situation. No, Imani said. What was distorted was letting one honest man's character get rewritten as ambition because I was too afraid to stand up for him. The room went still. Imani told the crowd plainly that she had initiated every private call and every dinner with Malcolm herself. He hadn't chased her through his job. He'd resigned from it so her decision could never hold power over his family's future. Preston's expression hardened. You're willing to blow up a partnership worth hundreds of millions over a man who wanted access to your life. Malcolm had access to my life, Imani said, and never once tried to own a piece of it. You had access to my trust, and you priced it before the ink was even dry. Several board members lowered their eyes. Renata announced the partnership was suspended pending an independent review, and that Foster's authority on the board was revoked in the interim. Preston closed the ring box with a sharp click. You're making an emotional decision. My emotional mistake, Imani said, was thinking your preparation meant you understood me. This decision is based on evidence. She glanced toward the back of the room. And now what happens? You trade an investor for a middle manager. Imani followed his gaze. Malcolm had one hand resting on the door handle, Zora beside him. Malcolm, Imani called out, her voice carrying across the whole ballroom, please don't leave before I finish speaking. The trio stopped mid-song. Every face turned. This isn't the moment to confuse business with emotion, Preston said under his breath. You made it a business moment, Imani said, before I ever walked into this room. Then she turned fully toward Malcolm. I failed you, she said. When your name needed my courage, I asked for time instead. I called it protecting the company. I was really protecting my own image of control. Malcolm didn't move. Imani stepped down from the small stage. I'm not asking you to come back so you can be my apology for Preston, or a reward for doing the right thing. I'm asking whether someday you'd let me earn one honest conversation with you. Malcolm looked out at the crowd, down at Zora and back at Imani. Are you asking me to stay, he said, or are you afraid to stand alone? I'm ready to stand alone, Imani said. I'm asking because I'd rather walk beside you if you ever decide to let me. No one clapped. Applause would have turned the whole thing into another show, and both of them had had enough of those. Malcolm let go of the door handle. I don't work for you anymore. I know, I can't be your escape hatch from Preston. I'm not asking you to be. I won't start anything on a promise made in front of cameras. Then let's start with nothing at all, Imani said. No promises. No titles. Just one dinner, whenever you're ready. Zora looked up at her father, the mended wing of the wooden bird catching the chandelier light from her bag. Malcolm's expression didn't turn joyful. Trust doesn't come back that fast, but something in the guarded set of his eyes loosened just enough to let hope in. One dinner, he said. The room finally exhaled. 8 days later, Imani arrived alone at a small neighborhood restaurant where Malcolm was already waiting by the window. No interviews tonight, he said as she sat down. No evaluations, no business. That might be difficult for me. I know. I'm willing to learn. They talked for 2 hours, about her first business plan scribbled on register receipts, about Denise's habit of dancing around the kitchen while dinner burned on the stove, about grief and ambition, and the people they used to be before either of those things took over. Neither one made promises. Neither one tried to smooth over what had already happened. When the check came, Imani reached for her card, then hesitated. Do they even take this here? Malcolm almost smiled. Yeah, they do. Over the following months, Imani eased into their life carefully. She showed up to Zora's science fair without making a spectacle of it, learned to make a passable pot of gumbo, and slowly stopped reaching for her checkbook every time something felt uncomfortable. Malcolm took a position at an independent logistics firm across town. Imani offered no investment, no title, no favor. She understood, finally, that respect meant letting him build something without her fingerprints on it. Trust came back the way it always does, in ordinary pieces. Imani showed up when she said she would and apologized without excuses when she didn't. Malcolm gradually stopped bracing for every disagreement to turn into an order. 6 months later, Zora had a small part in her school's spring recital. Imani arrived in a simple green dress with a small bouquet and took a seat beside Malcolm in the 3rd row. When Zora stepped onto the stage, the little mended bird pinned to her collar caught the stage lights. She scanned the audience until she found the two of them sitting together, and whatever nerves she'd carried on stage disappeared. During the final number, Imani rested her hand on the empty space between their seats, palm up. She didn't reach for him. She just offered the choice. Malcolm looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Ordinary enough for you, she whispered. A small, real smile crossed his mouth. He took her hand. From the stage, Zora caught the moment and beamed so wide it lit up the whole auditorium. There was no ring that night, no announcement, no press release. Just a father who'd protected his own dignity long enough to let it mean something. A woman who'd finally learned that power could never stand in for courage. And a little girl who'd understood all along that broken things weren't the same as lost ones. After the recital, Zora ran over waving her participation certificate. Did you hear me? Every word, Malcolm said. Imani knelt down to her level. You were wonderful. Zora glanced down at their joined hands. Does this mean you're staying? Imani looked at Malcolm before she answered. It means we're building something, carefully. That takes forever, Zora said, wrinkling her nose. Good things usually do, Malcolm said. Outside, the evening light turned the parking lot gold. No cameras, no board members waiting on a decision. Just 3 people who had spent a long time being lonely in very different ways, quietly learning how to become something whole. Imani had once believed love would come attached to a resume and a perfectly reasoned decision. Instead, it arrived through overcooked pasta, a broken wooden bird, an apology that cost her almost everything, and a man who was willing to walk away until she could finally choose him freely instead of out of habit. Malcolm had once believed dignity meant leaving before anyone could shrink his love down into ambition. He learned, slower than he would have liked. That dignity could also mean staying long enough to find out whether someone had actually changed. Zora had understood the whole thing from the very beginning. The right people never wanted the costume, the title, or the polished version of a person standing under chandelier light. They wanted whoever was left standing once all of that fell away. As the three of them crossed the parking lot together, Zora walked in the middle, one hand in each of theirs, still taking it one step at a time. Imani asked. Malcolm squeezed her hand. One ordinary day at a time. Zora tugged them both forward, laughing about something only she found funny, and for the first time in her life, Imani Carter discovered that being chosen didn't feel like winning anything at all. It felt like being known, forgiven, slowly, and welcomed home, without ever having to perform for it.